Hi, how's it going? I tend to video our training quite a bit for a few reasons. One, of course, because I'm putting out downloads, I'm filming instructional content for the membership channel and so on. And I've always found video a very useful tool as a teacher. And of course, when you do something from your perspective, it often feels great, but when you look at it on video, the mistakes become glaringly obvious. So a very useful tool for teaching and for monitoring ourselves as well. And looking back at the footage while I was doing some editing for the channel, I noticed across the group two main mistakes coming in, the same mistakes, funnily enough. Two mistakes, but really they both fall under the heading of what I call integration. So what I'm going to be doing for this month's vlog is giving you a quick overview of how we approach this question of integration in Systema. So this has been the focus of our work in the Saturday morning sessions here. It's been the focus of our latest work on the member channel. And of course, if you want to get access to all that instructional content, just click the join button below. And this idea of integration, what that means to me is, well, first of all, there's integration across the whole body. The body is capable of moving as a single unit. Of course, we can break that down into its component parts, but the body moves as a unit. That also applies to us psychologically, mentally, emotionally. The mind is working in unison with the body and vice versa. There's no distractions, we've got a good focus. Basically, we're working into that idea of flow state. And when we have this integration working, when we're in that flow state, that's when all the best stuff happens. For me, this also ties in a lot with our ideas of natural movement and everything else, but I'm just going to try and keep focused on one thing today. The other aspect of integration, of course, is bringing all our work together. Now, Systema has fewer principles, we might say, in some respects, than other arts. We've got our basic 4 pillars, right? Our movement, tension relaxation, our breathing, and our posture or form. Quite often then, when we do drills or exercises, we might just be working on 1 or 2 of those. I mean, the breathing is always a given anyway, but we might be working specifically on maintaining posture throughout the movement, for example. It might also be, especially if we're talking application work, let's say we're doing knife defense, that we just focus on one particular aspect of that defense. It might be evasion, it might be controlling the knife hand, or it could be this idea of we cut that situation down into slices. So we're just focusing on this particular 1 second within that whole situation. Of course, at some point, we have to integrate all these things together to get the full experience, to get the full benefit from our training. Now, traditionally, at least in most people's eyes, the way that martial arts approach this idea of integration within the body and in the movement is through practicing forms. Series of set movements. They might be quite short, they might just be 2 or 3 movements. They might be very long and complex, like the Tai Chi form, 108 movements. They could be a series of short forms. So I think Shotokan, for example, has got 12 kata. Correct me if I'm wrong. Now, that was something I did for quite a long time myself. I trained in quite a few versions of the Yang Long form, for example, and some various other arts as well. And to my mind, there are some pros and cons with that approach. I think the pros are that, especially doing something like the Tai Chi form, it's very good for getting people into the flow state. So I tend to use that a lot in my health classes or versions of it in order to help people get into that flow state and, of course, to get them moving. I think the downside is, one, forms take a lot of time to practice, and there's often this idea of your form has to be perfect, you know, down to the last millimetre. The adjustments are very slight, and that can go on for years and years and years. I think the second thing is most forms, as far as I can see or I've experienced, put you into a very set way of moving. It might be very linear punching, for example. It might be that you've got to stand in a certain position, or it might be, as I found, you're not allowed to lift your shoulders up at all, you know. So they can be, again, in my view, quite restrictive. Systema, of course, doesn't have any forms, no kata, no set movements. What we're really looking to do is to tap into the body's natural movement, and through that we find the body's natural integration. I always think it's interesting when you see depictions of cavemen or cave women, and they're always very primitive and they go ugh and they sort of lumber around. You're not going to catch anything for dinner moving like that. And I think it's interesting when you see people today who still have that lifestyle. If you look at their movement, it's very quiet, it's very integrated, it can be very subtle as well. So to me, a lot of this work is about getting back to our natural movement rather than trying to impose some sort of style, a stylized type of movement on what we already know. So how can we work this in Systema? We don't have any set movements. Do we need to invent a Systema form? Movement 1, movement 2? No, I don't think we do at all. But what we can do, and there are a few different approaches. One thing we've been using, we started this in the health class is actually because there's a lot of work there goes on balance and flow state and posture. And we started with this idea of balancing the stick. So you get the stick. Now at first you can balance it on the 2 hands, but ideally we want the stick balanced just across the 1 hand there. And already even just doing this, if you have some inner tension or things aren't quite working together, this can already be a challenge, just to stand in good posture and keep still for a couple of minutes. From there, we go into a range of exercises where we start moving the stick around and we begin moving with the stick. And of course, within this, we're incorporating our breathing, we're incorporating our posture. This starts to help people get a sense of the body and the breath working as one unit. Because if my feet are going one way and my hands going the other way, it's difficult to balance the stick if that connection is broken. So it's not that I have to go right foot, left foot and keep everything rigid in place. But if the body is just moving as one unit, everything stays nicely balanced and nicely focused. This also has a very beneficial psychological, mental effect as well. It's very calming work. Now, this is a quick overview. As I said, so all this work today we can put in various complications, we can add in various layers and level. But what I'll show you today are the basics, if you like. Once we've done that solo work with the stick, we can go to doing partner work. And one of the best things here for getting that integrated movement is throwing and catching the stick. We've got a whole range of exercises and drills that we do in pairs or we do in groups. But really the initial one is you just throw and catch the stick to start. But as you catch the stick, you move the body. Again, it's a very natural human movement. If you throw something at someone, 99% they'll catch it if they see it coming, of course, depending how you throw it. But it's just a very natural human movement. No one needs to be trained in catching. No one needs to learn a set routine in order just to catch something. So again, the idea of a very natural movement, but we're doing it in that integrated way. We breathe, we move, we catch the stick, we throw it back. From there we can transition to the sword. No, don't worry, we're not going to be throwing and catching these. We come back to our movement, this time with the sword. It's interesting to see and to speculate just how much empty hand work in Systema comes from sword work. Again, that's another subject, so I might look at that in the future. But the aim now is to get people just moving around with the sword. In films, of course, people use the swords and knives like this. There's stuff going on all over the place. There's very little integration because for cinema, right, you want things to look big. People need to be able to see what's going on. In actual use, you don't want to keep anything sticking out because there's an instant target, right? When people actually fight with swords or knives, it looks a lot less dramatic than you might expect. Everyone's trying to keep everything in. So now we start just to move around with the sword. And if we're moving the sword, like if I want to cut with the sword, I'm not cutting like this, but I'm using the whole body here, here, here. So it's that whole body integration again to work with the sword. So how does this feed into our practical work? Well, there's a couple of ways here. We can use the same movement example with the sword and with empty hand. So if I'm moving like this with the sword, for example, I'm bringing the sword across to the left, I cut across to the right, all working the whole body. Now, if we work that against an attack, we see how we get a deflection and a cut. And again, this is a very simple example, but to be honest, the best work always is simple. Doesn't mean that it's easy, but it should be simple. It's very basic. There's no complicated movements here. I just have to know how to use the body as a single unit, and I have to be in the mindset or the mind space where I can do that. There's no aggression, there's no anger or anything else. It's just a simple human movement. Now, if we look at that with the empty hands, we can do exactly that same thing against a punch. The punch comes in, move to the left, move to the right. Little step with the left foot, little step with the right foot. Very simple again, very basic. But of course, the other thing that starts happening when you get integrated movement is you start to increase your power, because you understand how you can link all that body movement together and bring it out on that point of impact. So when you learn this, it means you don't have to rely on a stance to generate your power. And the more focused you get, the less actual movement you need. So you can see people at the top of their game need very little movement in order to develop a lot of power. But we don't even have to be thinking about impact and generating power. If we go back to that move of balancing the stick, we apply that in the same way. Someone comes in to grab, we take their weight a little, we accept their weight, we give them a little bit of support, and then we float them. We move them exactly in the same way as we do the stick. Again, no special stance, left foot, right foot, left foot, just a little bit of movement with the feet. Everything is just working integrated, and then it becomes relatively easy to control a person who's trying to grab you or put some sort of lock on you or whatever. That's the first error then, this idea of not integrating the body movement, of things being separated out a bit. And it leads us into the second mistake I noticed, which is where people stop or pause in their work. This tends to happen when we're working against another person, because if we go back to doing our forms or our kata, or even if we're just working freestyle movement with a stick or whatever it is, we can get this nice flow going, because of course our movement is not opposed, it's not interrupted. The minute we put something in the way of that movement, some potential resistance, we encounter that resistance, then sometimes there's like a stop and a pause there, and we try and push through it rather than maybe just go around it. But the other thing that happens as well, I see it mostly when people punch. So they'll do a nice deflection or something here, and then they'll punch like this. And it's almost like there's a pause to see what the punch has done. Normally when people do this, a couple of other things happen as well. One, the face changes, because they want to punch, they want to put some power into the punch. The second thing is we get this tension into the body, particularly the legs, the feet, and they get a little bit stuck, a little bit rooted on the spot. Now, I think in some ways this stems from conditioning. We can look at martial arts films in particular where they have a certain rhythm. And I guess, you know, any film with fight sequences, again, we have to remember they're created for dramatic effects and for narrative, not to portray a real fight. Generally, there are some exceptions. So we tend to get this hut, 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 hut kind of thing going on. Or we get something that's an exchange. So the bad guy goes boom, 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 and then he sets back, and then the good guy goes boom, 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 boom. This kind of thing. Also, in line with that is, I say, this idea of wanting to put power into the movement, and people think they have to be aggressive for that. You don't have to be aggressive. If you're focused, as I said before, and the body is integrated, everything arrives at once. The power arises out of your movement. Of course, there are little tweaks you can put in to increase the power, but the power doesn't come from this, it comes from this. Again, a lot of martial arts talk about that, but when you see them in action, because of this idea of emotional tension, if you like, I think someone once described it as, then you tend to get this staccato-like movement developing. There's lots of different ways to work around this. One of the best ways to start is with the breathing, of course. So we're used generally to inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. But this, you know, it's like a steam train. It's still quite staccato. Instead, I want you to think about a wave. How many people can stand up and fight a wave? Why is the wave so strong? Because it's a continuous surge of movement. The water isn't exerting force, it's just that momentum and movement of the wave that takes everything in its path. And when we think about that wave, it's not coming up in little increments. It builds. So if we put that into our work with our punching, rather than do punches on the exhale. Inhale, then whether you do this solo with the pads on the bag, whatever, doesn't matter, but get used to that. Don't think exhale, punch, think exhale and keep punching until the exhale stops. So of course you need to develop good breath control for this and everything else. This also prevents tension coming to the body, because if I'm exhaling, it's hard to set myself in that position. Again, if we've done that training, when we exhale, we release tension. So when you work with someone, rather than thinking, you think, and you just exhale. Hopefully you can get enough hits in that exhale to finish the job. If not, well, then that takes you on to the next part where you learn to hit on the inhale as well. So I'd like you to think about this in your own training. How do you work to get all that integration going? There's some ideas there that you might find useful. Basically, when you're moving and working, see, for example, if a punch is coming in, do you just move the head? If the knife is coming in, do you move the torso out of the way? That's fine, but in doing so, do you find you then getting stuck? Like here, my sort of feet are a little bit stuck, my hips are a little bit stuck. So it compromises my ability to move from there. Whereas if I'm using that whole body movement, everything is getting out of the way, but everything is also ready to come back in and counter. The problem with this approach, of course, is, well, what's your fighting stance? Oh, my fighting stance is this. What's your fighting stance? Well, it's this. You know, we live in a visual world. Visually, it doesn't look very exciting at all. Where's the tension? Where's the effort? How is it you can punch someone and they fall over when all you're doing is this? Well, the answer is it's that integrated body and psychological movement that is producing that effect. So it's very simple work, so simple that a lot of people overlook it, or, you know, do it for a minute and think, oh yeah, that's that, I've got that. But it's something you can always go back to and refine. I hope you find some of those ideas useful. Do let me know, of course, if you've got any comments, questions or suggestions, pop them down below. And if you want to get access to all that instructional content on the member channel, just click the join button below. All right, that's it for now. I'll see you next time.